Indian literature, the Indian literature versus the, you know, uh, the problems imposed by the word Indian literature itself, because in India, literature is quite different than what the Western ideology of literature is.
Exactly.
Uh, yeah, that, and then comparison for the sake. So we compare these words, the differences between them, for the sake of differentiation between the words and what their cultural and historical
Hmm.
implications are.
Correct. Correct.
So words across languages are not always equivalent.
Right.
Um, so, and then another important thing was in the word Indian, the notion of nationality and all that we discussed,
Right.
and how the Western notion of nation is very different from the Indian understanding of this term. So there's a lot of
Right.
diversity of languages and culture in India, whereas whereas in the US or the Western part of the world, it is not so. Like there is diversity, but there is also a focus on one language,
Hmm.
monolingualism,
Right.
and in India there is also the a very important aspect, that is the anti-colonial struggle.
Hmm.
Uh, so that is an important part of the Indian notion of nation. How we came about to call ourselves Indians is
Right.
very much interconnected with our anti-colonial struggle.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So uh, I am okay. There was a lot that we discussed. So should I go on?
And what else? Does anyone else remember apart from Stuti? What else apart from the things that she has mentioned did we discuss? Who else remembers? No one else remembers? और कुछ याद ही नहीं है. Yeah? No one else remembers anything? Yes, go ahead, Gaurav.
The discussion between is Indian English and an Indian language or not.
Hmm. So what do you remember from that? Good.
Uh, I just remember this topic. I mean, I don't remember the whole debate, but
Right. That's an important topic, right? Anyone else remembers the debate around it?
Like we took the language and made it our own. We don't speak
Ah,
English the way Britishers do. That accent, the slang, it's all quite different in India. So it can be considered an Indian language. Indian English can be considered an Indian language. And also the discussions about Macaulay and English as the medium of education in India.
right.
And there was this thing that you quoted from The Tempest, that
Right.
I learn your language so I can curse you. in it.
Right.
uh, and and also the reason for English being so prevalent in India is because even in the anti-colonial struggle, our leaders used English extensively. So that has had a huge impact on
Yes, very
why
good.
we still use English so much.
Right. For example, great leaders like Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, as well as
Gandhiji,
Tilak
Nehruji.
and Gandhi and Nehru and Sardar Patel and many other, almost Subhash Chandra Bose and many other leaders use English extensively, right, for their communications. And that resulted also in English being one of the important language of Indian Constitution was composed in English, right? So that is the importance of. So there is the paradox of English that on one hand, English is seen as a foreign language, a kind of leftover of colonial baggage. And then on the other hand, it has played such a key role in imagining the nation, modern Indian nation. So it's very paradoxical, right? Yes, someone else had to say something. Dharma or who?
Yes, sir. Sir,
Yeah,
I had a question.
go ahead, go
Uh,
ahead.
you said that our freedom fighters used English extensively, but
Hmm.
at that time, the masses, if these people had to influence the masses, so how did the usage of English language, uh, played its role? Uh,
Very interesting and important question. So, because very few people in India, almost 90% or 95% of people did not know English, right? So, it was Gandhi rather, right, who insisted on making the national struggle go beyond the elite upper caste, upper class formation that was Congress, right? So, Congress established, Indian National Congress established in 1885 was largely dominated by these English educated elites, lawyers and all the leaders, business leaders and all that. However, Gandhi was first to realize that there is hardly any connect with the masses. And that's why he changed not only his thoughts. He went around, his teacher Gopal Krishna Gokhale told him to tour India. So he went touring India. And what he felt and saw was immense poverty. And he tried to understand India firsthand rather than from textbooks and syllabus, right? And he realized that there is a disconnect in the nationalist movement between the elite Congress and the masses, poorer masses. So he adopted the very Indian langoti and that get-up. Uh, he abandoned his lawyer's suit and all that, and he started using Gujarati and Hindi extensively to talk to people, right, about, and that is how he succeeded in, and he's also brought out Hindi and Gujarati periodicals and things. So that is how he mobilized the masses, right? And even then, and he was very much anti-English at times, right? Not always. And he believed that English education and everything that the West stands for has to be disbanded almost uh, and opposed because it stands for the culture of exploitation and industrialism and capitalism would damage Indian society. So he was anti-Western capitalist industrial ideology. But even then, he drew upon many Western thinkers like Henry David Thoreau, who proposed the idea of civil disobedience, and he also drew upon ideas of Tolstoy, Leo Tolstoy, right, and so on. So the point that I'm making is that though he positioned himself as anti-West, he drew upon West, and he also ran a journal called Harijan, which was in English, right? So he would, and he called it Harijan, right? So that it would, that because it is in English, it would reach the elites. while there was other papers that he ran for the masses in Gujarati and Hindi. So what we are looking at is the language politics, how language cannot be separated from politics. And Gandhi was probably the first leader to mobilize masses, right?
So a balance between communicating in English and the local languages. So he
Right.
used English to connect with the upper class and to mobilize the lower classes, the mass. He used local languages. Smart
Right,
move.
Hindi and Gujarati, right? So Gandhian politics has to be understood as also politics of language, right? Freedom struggle has to be in vernacular. Anti-colonial movement has to be mass movement. So unlike all other leaders, Gandhi had the biggest mass base, right? And while all other leaders were extremely westernized, uh, ability of Gandhi to mobilize masses was maximum. So at one instance, he would say that you leave your government jobs and join the agitation. Then people would leave their jobs and join the agitations, right? Can you think of any leader today who can do that? Or when he says that burn all your Western clothing and adopt khadi, then people would create bonfire and burn their Western cloth. Uh, and he would say, strike, upwas, kal se or strike. And the entire nation would come to a standstill, right? And he was not in a position of any authority. He was not the prime minister or viceroy, yeah, not even the president of Congress, right? So you can see the ability of Gandhi to reach to the masses was far more than any other leader in India. Okay, so that brings us to the politics of English and language, something that we discussed. Okay, and then we also started discussing Sanskrit literature, right? And prehistory of India also I mentioned. Did I discuss all these things?
Yes, sir. We were talking about all this.
So apart from Stuti, anyone else remembers Sanskrit literature and as well as the prehistory? Who remembers that? You may be wrong, but you can try whatever little you remember. No need to give always a kind of perfect answer. किसको याद है? किसी को नहीं? भार्गवी, फिजा, ध्रुविक, धर्मा, anyone else? अनुया, याद है?
Yes, sir, I remember us talking about Kabir and reciting his dohes.
Right,
And
because
yeah.
that's part of
The-
our syllabus again, right?
I think we talked about the Bhakti movement, but we did not move on to Sanskrit literature yet.
Okay.
ये वाले क्लास में आप चालू करने वाले थे. So we had this long discussion of ये language वाला, and then we were discussing the Bhakti movement and the Indian movements. Yes.
Yeah, so what we will do is have extensive discussion on Bhakti period, the so-called medieval period, right? When we reach the next unit on Kabir and Mahadevi, we'll do that. So let's start with Sanskrit. And if you remember, we did discuss something about prehistory of Indian subcontinent, right? How the idea of nation is a modern nation. And there were many kinds of other terms used for India like Bharatvarsh and Aryavrat, but they signified a different kind of geographical space, which does not include everything in modern India, right? And we looked at the prehistory of Indian subcontinent. Did we talk about Harappan civilization? Does anyone remember?
Yes, sir.
So what do you remember from that?
History is not constant, it can change,
Yes.
because we didn't know about the Harappan civilization until
Right.
1955, I think.
20th century, in fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Gaurav, what do you remember?
We discussed that it was not Aryan invasion, but migration.
Right. Because the whole Indian Aryan theory was invention of British, like Mortimer Wheeler, right? And he thought that the Aryans came and destroyed Harappan civilization, but that's not true, because Aryans were actually not a race, but various kind of pastoral, nomadic people from steppes, right, in Central Asia. They came down and they started settling down in Indian subcontinent and near the North Indian region. And they did not have any idea of this great urban civilization, right? Because their literature of these people who spoke a very primitive form of Sanskrit, the early Vedic Sanskrit or early Indo-Aryan language, right? Uh, and we did discuss language families, right? Dravidian family of language and Indo-Aryan family of languages, right? Do you remember that? The North Indian languages are largely Indo-Aryan languages, while South Indian languages are of Dravid origin, like Kannada, Tamil, uh, Kannada, Malayalam, and Telugu. Do you remember that? Does anyone remember?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So they brought with them uh, knowledge and a word in their language, the speakers of Indo-Aryan. So I will prefer the term speakers of Indo-Aryan, because if you consider this group of people as a race, right, that becomes a problem, and that became a problem especially in Europe when they used Aryan to stand for race, right? And especially Hitler misused this whole Aryan theory, and he started exterminating Jews and everyone else who he thought was not Aryan, and that led to a massive kind of violence that led to the Second World War, right, against Jews and others. So the Aryans were not race, neither was there Aryan invasion, right? So these are the groups of Central Asian people who came in waves, and they brought their knowledge systems with them, and that knowledge system was memorized. It was not written down, because they did not have a script. While the Harappan civilization had a script, right? Harappan civilization also had great cities, great baths, great granaries. They were extensively agricultural city builders, right? With drainage system far more efficient than the one we have today, right? It was an urban civilization about which we know very little, because the script is not yet decoded, right? And the Aryan brought their literature with them, and this literature does not show any awareness of this major urban civilization called Harappan civilization. So it was forgotten by them. So there was no such thing like invasion of Aryans, right? So these people, their key text, and all this we have already discussed, were the Samhitas, right? Of the earliest one being Rig Ved, which belongs to the earliest Vedic literature, right? And then the later Vedic period, you have other Vedic texts like Atharva Ved, Samved, Yajur Ved, and then Aranyaks were the commentaries written on this. And then you also had uh, Brahman texts, and also Upanishads, which were deeply philosophical. Right. So all this is called Vedic corpus or Vedic oeuvre. So it consists of 4 important samhitas, the text, followed by the commentaries and explanation and philosophical speculation, which belongs to later period of Indo-Aryan culture, right? And this was also the period of codification, means after 1000 years of Vedic texts, lot of its meaning started disappearing. So people started developing bodies of knowledge to understand, interpret Vedic texts, right? And that is called Vedanga. Vedanga or the organs of Vedas, limbs of Vedas. Like Nirukta was a kind of etymological system developed by Yasta, who was one of the important thinkers who started interpreting Vedic text, followed by grammarians like Panini and Bhartuhari. Right. So along with Nirukta, you also have other Vedanga, that is Vyakarana or grammar, as we understand, not exactly as we understand it today, but interpretation of text based on analysis of sentences and words. Because all these texts have to be interpreted, right? So these are various systems which also included things like Jyotish and Ganit. Jyotish was largely astronomy. That means you have to decide what is the auspicious movement for doing some of the most important practices in Vedic culture called Yagna, right? That Yagna was considered. So you have to decide which time is auspicious, which time is inauspicious. Yes, Tuti, go ahead.
So, Jyotishi is astrology or astronomy?
It is astrology,
Yeah.
right? And the distinction between astrology and astronomy is a modern one. In the West,
Right.
With the rise of scientific techniques and scientific method being developed by Copernicus and others, there was a kind of split between astrology and astronomy. So astrology was again a system of knowledge based on stars and their configurations. Right? So Jyotish was another Vedanga. So all these are Vedanga. Then there was Chanda, which was about meter and poet and how to sing, right? So especially based on Samveda, which was about how to sing Vedic ruchas or mantras. So this is the system of knowledge that developed centuries after the Vedic corpus, so as to interpret it, so as to understand it, so as to learn how to implement it. Right. So this is a long historical process. And in the meanwhile, you also see development of various religious paths or panthas or mat, right? Mat as an opinion, but mat as also a kind of ideology, you can say. And the earliest were the Shramanas, who opposed Shramanas as against Brahmanas, right? So Brahmanas were the priestly class who promoted and upheld the Vedic Mata, right? And against it were Shramana traditions, right? And these were the traditions of renunciation. So both of them had a common agenda, and that agenda was to how to find ultimate liberation, that is moksha, from the cycles of samsara. Samsara is a very important philosophical idea in Indian philosophy, right? And samsara means wandering, bhatakna. और वो भटकना कौन सा है? Wandering from birth to birth, right? So birth and rebirth, you have to finally get rid of this wandering and find ultimate liberation So various schools developed their own theories of how to achieve this escape from cycles of birth and rebirth. And the Vedic and Vedantic Vedic Brahmanas were countered by other sects, dharmas, right? And two or three most important philosophical systems that emerged were Buddhism and Jainism. And third, very important, was Charvak school, right? So Buddhists and Jainas held the core value was they opposed animal sacrifice, right, which was part of important yagnas. So Ashwamedha yagna would involve sacrifice of horse, right? And a lot of sacrifice was done in Vedic yagnas. So these people opposed it tooth and nail because they felt that the violence done to any animal can result in rebirth, right? You might be reborn as a horse next time, so that you will be sacrificed. So it's better not to indulge in all these things. So they opposed it tooth and nail. They also opposed, acha, yeah, they opposed the entire Vedic framework of thought based on Vedic philosophy of Chatur Varna or four Varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and four ashramas like Grihastha which is for Brahmacharya ashram is first 25 years of your life, where you study Vedic texts, followed by Grihastha where you follow the life of householder, and then Vanaprastha when you go to forest and practice austerities, and final last 25 years of human life would be sannyas ashram, or you take complete renunciation. So that was the Vedic framework. Four Vedas, four ashram, four Varnas, everything was rejected by these three important schools or philosophies: Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvak. Right. So Buddhism opposed some of the core principles of Vedic philosophy, that is the belief in Brahma, that is the ultimate reality, Atma, right, that is the self. So Buddhists were called Nairatmyavad, means they did not believe in the idea of Atma, self. Jainas would practice ahimsa to its extreme, and they believe in renunciation, absolute renunciation, right? So you have people like Shvetambara and Digambar sects, later development, where the key idea is aparigraha, means not to hold on to anything, including clothes, right? So the extreme form of ahimsa and aparigraha was the philosophy underpinnings of Jainism. And they also proposed a kind of relativistic framework of knowledge based on something called Syadvad. Syad means probably, right? So they would argue that probably the screen that exists in front of you exists. Probably it exists. Probably it does not exist, right? Probably it exists and does not exist, and so on. There would be 7-step logic that the Jainas would follow, right? And they developed entirely different framework which does not believe in Brahma or Atma. They would believe in Jiva and Karma, basically. So these schools of thought, third was the extremist Charvak school, right? They were the absolute materialists who would believe that there is no such thing like rebirth. So there is no such thing like,
So
yeah.
can you write this down in the chat box? The third religion, the name of the
Charvak.
third religion.
Charvak.
Charvas.
Yes, Charvak. From the word charu, which means sweet speaking. And they were parodied later by people who called them that these people are hedonists, in the sense that they believe that runam krutva grutam pibet means आप कर्ज निकाल के घी पियो, क्योंकि वैसे भी आप मरने वाले हो और उसके बाद कोई स्वर्ग नहीं है, कोई नरक नहीं है, सब कुछ खत्म हो जाने वाला है आपके शरीर के साथ, तो एंजॉय योर लाइफ. So people caricatured this philosophy, but the idea was that their metaphysics was that there is no such thing like hell or heaven or rebirth. So that flew in the face of all the three major philosophies: Vedant, Vedic philosophy, Jain philosophy, and Buddhist philosophy, who believed, all the three believed in rebirth, right? That, and this is the school which says there is no such thing like rebirth, right? So they were absolutely antagonistic to these three schools. So the three important sects, Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvak, are called Gnostic traditions, right? As against Vedic Brahmanism, which was Astic tradition, right? Astic does not exactly mean you believe in God. It's not atheism or theism. Astic would mean you believe in Brahma and Atma. You believe in Ved, you believe in Shabda. And these philosophical schools, you may say, or philosophical religions, you can say, had a different epistemologies or theories of knowledge, right? So the Vedic philosophy was based on the idea that you can know truth even through words. Shabda would be considered as praman, as proof of truth. The other proofs were things like inference. Pratyaksha would mean you have seen it with your eyes. Inference would mean anuman, right? So an example of anuman would be that if there is fire, if there is smoke on the hill, there is fire, right? So you can know the truth that there is fire on the hill by looking at the smoke. So they accepted the Vedic Mat would accept these three as praman, while Buddhism would not accept Shabda as praman, right? And Shabda also means Vedic Shabda, right? Shabda means Vedic Uvra as well, Vedic corpus as well. So they rejected Vedic Uvra. Jainism also rejected Shabda as praman. They would accept Pratyaksha and Anuman as the valid proofs, evidence of truth. So these are various Indian philosophies. Buddhism went on to become a global religion later, right? Because many kings who promoted it, especially the Mauryans, right, would take it as far as Sri Lanka, and then later on Chinese people would come and would take Buddhism to China and other parts, Tibet and other parts of the world. So Buddhism became a world religion, right? Vedic Brahmanism was largely in the domain of Indian subcontinent. Jainism was also probably limited to Indian subcontinent. And kings had to balance all these three religions, you can say. Again, we are talking of lack of equivalencies, right? We talked about how idea of nation is not exactly identical to Indian idea of nation, right? How literature does not exactly mean sahitya. In same way, religion does not exactly mean dharma. is lack of equivalence. Dharma is a very interesting idea, very complex idea, and has range of interpretation. So Buddhism is Dhamma, Dharma, as well as Vedic religion is also Vedic Dharma, right? And Jainism is also another Dharma. And Dharma is something similar to Guna Dharma, according to some people, which means like it's the nature of fire to burn. So that is the dharma of fire. It is the nature of water to flow. So it is dharma of water. So dharma of teacher is to teach, right? Dharma of student is to learn, study. So dharma in that sense. So it has got complex interpretation, and religion is not an equivalent at all, because religion term has its roots in the Abrahamic religions like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, which were theistic religions, and they believed in the idea of God and a book and a prophet. Right? In India, you don't have idea of book and a prophet, for example. So it's not a systematized. So dharma is a complex notion. So you also had dharma shastra, or knowledge of dharma, system of knowledge of dharma, which is of thieves. चोरों का भी धर्म हो सकता है. चोरी करना एक चोर का धर्म है. I hope you get what I'm saying. Right? So dharma is a complex notion. So you can't consider it as equivalent to religion. So the king usually had to balance between all these dharmas: Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, or Vedic Brahmanism. So they would patronize all the three most of the time, right? And at the same time, like Ashok would patronize all the three important dharmas. But he himself was in favor of Buddhism. So the story goes that after the Battle of Kalinga, he converted to Buddhism and he promoted Buddhism globally, wherever he went. So this is in brief history of knowledge systems in India, right? Then comes the topic that we want to discuss, and that is literature, right? Sahitya or Vangmay. And if you remember, Vangmay means anything that is made of words, anything that is made of Vak, which is considered to be a power, right? And that is the power of goddess Saraswati. So anything that is blessed with Saraswati is considered Vangmay. And people who are graced with Saraswati are called Saraswat. Saraswat not as a caste, but people who wrote literature very often, right? And it is divided, the Vangmay is divided into one that is Apurusheya, that is the Vedic Vangmay, right? It is not created by human beings, Apurusheya. It is created by God himself, right? That is one section of Vangmay. The second section is that which is created by semi-divine human beings like Rishis, which includes Itihas and Purana tradition. Not to be confused with histories, but it is a kind of knowledge about past. Ye hua tha, ye hua tha, ye hua tha, right? So Purana and Itihas tradition. Third would include Vangmay created by ordinary people or people for the sake of people. And that is subdivided into two more categories, Shastra and Kavya. Anything that you have to say about what I have said? So first, Vangmay as a big domain is divided into three parts. First is the Apurusheya, that is the Vedic oeuvre, also called Shruti, right? The second is created by semi-divine Rishis, Itihas Puran, also called Smruti, right? Shruti, Smruti. And third one is Laukik, or regarding this world, human. So it deals with human domain, right? And that human domain, Vangmaya, is divided into two parts. One is Shastra, or systematized knowledge. Knowledge which is systematized. It creates a system. Uh, so it's called Shastra. And Shastra can be of anything. For example, Arthashastra would be about how to rule over a kingdom, expand it, and so on. Arthashastra is not exactly economics, right? It is about political economy. I think we have mentioned that. Kama Shastra would be about sexuality and reproduction and getting pleasure out of life, right? Dharma Shastra would be about duties of various kinds of population. Dharma Shastra, Artha Shastra, Kama Shastra. Moksha Shastra would be largely about how to achieve the final liberation. So you can see that knowledge of Shastras are divided into four parts, corresponding to the four aims of human life. And those four aims or four purusharth is Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Dharma is following your Dharma. Second is Artha, is about wealth and power. Kama is about desire and pleasure, right? And fourth is Moksha, that is the ultimate liberation. So these are the four purusharth. So Shastra and Kavya. So Kavya is what we today understand as literary, right? So Kavya is a tradition of, and it does not mean poetry. It means something like poesis. Kavya would be prose also. You can have prose Kavya, Gadya Kavya, right? I hope you get what I'm saying. Kavya does not mean verse or prose. It means something that gives you aesthetic delight, right?
Anything of a literary nature.
Yeah, whose main aim, chief purpose is to give you aesthetic pleasure. That is called Kavya. And it is divided into two, Shravya Kavya and Drushya Kavya. Shravya is something that you hear being recited. For example, a heroic narrative or a romantic poem or whatever, right? That is Shravya Kavya. Drushya Kavya is something that you see. How does that sound? And that would include something that we are going to study, namely theater, right? So one of the earliest shastras of Natya or theater is Bharat's Natya Shastra, probably 2nd century before Christ or after Christ, we don't know. And that is one of the chief problems studying the ancient Indian literature and philosophy, that we cannot historically locate these things very precisely, right? So Natya Shastra is a systematic knowledge about Natya. Does that make sense? Just like you have Kam Shastra, and most famous Kam Shastra is Vatsyayan's Kam Sutra, right? You heard of this book? How many of you have heard of Kam Sutra by Vatsyayan? No one. क्या हुआ? I think it is Dhara or Dhara. Harsh. Who has heard of this book called Kam Sutra? Raise your hands. I won't ask you what it is about, whether you have read it or not, but you have heard of it. Yes. Ah, yeah. Is a Harsh, Dharm, Maitreyi, Gaurav. Okay. So just like you have Kam Shastra, and later on in medieval period you had something like Kok Shastra, which is also an extension of Kam Sutra, Kam Shastra, right? So Natya Shastra deals with the knowledge about theater, right? And that is what we are going to study. Bharat's Natya Shastra in a small way, and then relate it to the play that we are going to study, that is Mudra Rakshas by Vishakdatta, right? Uh, Literary theory seems to have begun in India with Bharat's Natya Shastra. But many of the ideas existed in the Vedic corpus as well. For example, the idea of Kavi, right, existed in Vedic corpus, and Kavi means a scholar, a learned person, or somebody who can see future or has a vision. And this idea of Kavi that you find in Vedic corpus is very similar to the idea of Vates, Vates, Vates that you find in Latin literature, right? In the classical Western notion of Vates is that of prophet, a visionary. So Kavi is visionary or a scholar or a learned person. That was the meaning of the word Kavi, right? And Kavya was something that is made by a Kavi. So it is something like poesis in Greek. Poesis in Greek language means something that is made, banaya hua, artificial, right? And that would include prose, poetry, etc. And there is no equivalent to word poesis or kavya in English, right? In English, poetry means what? What that which is versified. ऐसा उसका पुराना एक idea था. Novel would not be considered as poetry, right? So you can see a different generic classification in classical West as well as classical Indian literary theory. So Kavya is not to be confused with poetry. It is more of poesis, right? And Kavi can be a person who composes prose as well as verse, can write a play as well as a, so play, dramatic. So theater, novel, and poetry, which are considered separate in the West, all come under the category of poesis, all come under the category of kavya, right? Any questions about what I have said? Doubts?
So can you please repeat what you said falls under poesis?
Prose as well as verse, right? Theater, everything would fall under poesis. So poesis in Greek is equivalent to kavya in Sanskrit. Not to be confused with poetry. So modern meaning of word kavya is kavita, right? But that's not what we mean in Sanskrit poetics. Kavya would mean prose, verse, anything. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now in Natya Shastra attributed to Bharat, the story goes that the gods under Indra and Asur, they were all fed up with their life, bored with fighting and all that. Most of the time they are seen as at loggerheads. Asur is not to be understood as demons, but as something else. opponents of gods, right? And Dev and Asur, Dev led by Indra, they went to Brahma, right? And Brahma, they asked that we need something for our entertainment. खेलने के लिए, क्रीडा करने के लिए, हमें एंटरटेनमेंट के लिए, खेलने के लिए कुछ दो, जो सुना भी जा सके और देखा भी जा सके, दृश्य हो और श्राव्य हो. So Lord Brahma derived various aspects of theater from the Vedic Udra, right? From Rigved he took things like philosophy and all that. From Sam he took things like singing, right? And so on. From all Vedas he took several things and made this thing called theater, right? And this theater, जिसे ड्रामा कह सकते हो या नाट्य, right? And the word comes from nruta, which means to dance. So it has something to do with dance and choreography, right? So people who study Bharatnatyam, for example, study Bharat's Natya Shastra. Some elements of ideas from Bharatnatya Shastra. Anyone studying Bharatnatyam in the class? No one. सो गए हो या क्या कर रहे हो? खाना खा रहे हो या चैट कर रहे हो? What are you doing? टीवी देख रहे हो?
Sir, right here.
हाँ?
इधर ही है सर. आपको
इधर ही
सुन
है.
रहा
Okay.
मेकिंग
Cool.
नोट.
मुझे लगा सो गए आप. Right. So he gave this plaything to people, right? Bharatnatyam, yeah. So the word Bharat comes from Bharat, who has this Natya Shastra attributed to that rishi, right? Okay. So he gave this plaything to people, and that's how theater emerged according to the Natya Shastra. This is the origin. This is the origin of theater according to Bharat's Natya Shastra, right? So it has emerged from Vedic things. Performance of ritual was also part of important Vedic texts, like Yajurveda or Atharva Veda would be about performing the ritual. So one aspect of theater is ritual, other is singing, psalm. Then there is also knowledge, and there is also dharma. So all these ideas are pulled together in form of plaything called Natya. Now it was performed by people who are called Bharatas, right? Bharat ही कहते थे जो perform करते थे, and most of them belong to the lower castes. Most of them are Shudras in Bharat's Natya Shastra, right? So Bharat वो है जो theater करते हैं, actors, right? Women were not allowed. Women's role was played by men, as in the Western theater, right? So that is how theater is believed to have originated, according to the Bharat's Natya Shastra. Yes, Gaurav, go ahead.
Yeah, sir. You said this that and the female role was played by a male character. So it still carries on in the Bhavai tradition, Gujarat Bhavai tradition.
The folk theater of India, right? The Bhavai or Tamasha, or in Maharashtra, Gondal. In all these, till I think the beginning of this 20th century, women's role was done by men. And most of the performers are the lower caste people, people who are condemned to be lower caste. So folk theater is preserved by non-elites. And in So you may find certain upper caste people also associated with Bhavai. For example, yeah, Asai Thakur was a great Bhavai writer in 15th century Gujarat, who was a Brahmin, right? And all his team would be largely a lower caste. Yeah, Gaurav, you have to say something? Okay. So that is how theater emerged, right? And then how does it work is what Bharat's Natya Shastra tells us. It's a compendium, it's a huge encyclopedia, because knowledge was seen as encyclopedic in the sense that you gather all the important knowledge. So how to act, how to set up stage, how to wear costumes, how to sing, how to dance, how to do several things that you do on stage is what the whole text comprises of, Natya Shastra, right? And the central idea of this has remained the central idea of Sanskrit poetics for almost 2000 years, right? And that central idea is the notion of ras. Ras would mean something like flavor, right? But also would mean something like chemical, rasayan, right? Can also mean something like sap or juice. But Bharat specifically uses the metaphor of food, that just like you pull together several things, ingredients, and prepare a recipe, and it gives you certain flavor, right? In same way, several ingredients go into making of a plate, and they result in certain flavor called ras, right? So the central trope of Sanskrit poetics for 2000 years after Bharat is the idea of rasa. And the Natya Shastra lays down a formula that कैसे रस realize होता है, right? And ras is distinct from bhav. Bhav is a emotional state. For example, many of you may be bored right now, so that is a bhav. But that is more temporary. It's vyabhichari bhav. Vyabhichari are the corrupt or transient bhav, according to Natya Shastra. But those bhav, those emotions which are stable, is called sthai bhav, right? So sthai bhav is the state of mind which is more or less stable. Like, and Bharatnatyam Shastra gives 8 sthai bhav, right? Rati or sexual desire, has or laughter, sorrow or shok, dukh, utsah or heroic energy, bhaya, that is fear, anger, krodh, disgust, jugapsa. Disgust is also an emotional state, right? You are disgusted by certain things. Wonder or vismaya, and dispassion or some sam, that is the 9th rasa, 9th sthai bhav, which is not mentioned in Bharat Natya Shastra. Now these emotions have to be communicated to audience, and when audience experiences these emotions which are transmitted artistically, it turns into rasa, right? So consider bhai, fear. When that is communicated to the audience, then audience is called saharudaya, means somebody who has got heart similar to that of artist or the actors. जिसका heart saharudaya, उसके जैसा ही है. So that spectator's heart is with the heart of the writer. Sahrudaya is an important concept. Spectator, देखने वाला, right? He or she experiences these emotions in a aesthetic form, and that is called rasa. So many people watch horror, right? How many of you watch horror films or movies or serials, right? Right. Now, horror is uh, according to uh, Natya Shastra, horror spectator. Maitreyi, Sahrudaya is spectator, देखने वाला प्रेक्षक, right? Audience basically of the play. Okay, so when you watch horror, you get pleasure out of it because you experience something called rasa, called bhayanak. Bhay is actual feeling of fear. Bhayanak is the aesthetic realization of that feeling. Does that make any sense? And that's why people watch horror and slasher. Slasher में जो खून खराबा होता है. I don't know if you're aware of a genre called slasher. जिसमें वो serial killer होता है, वो खून करते रहता है सबका. I know what you did last summer, right? You were locked up due to corona. So I will come and kill you. So serial killers. Now that gives rise to jugupsa and bhay. Jugupsa is disgust. But you enjoy watching that. Now, why would people do that? Now, nobody would like to meet a serial killer, right? When you are walking down night all alone, nobody would be interested in meeting a serial killer, or when you are alone at night under your bedroom, you don't want host to say something to you, right? कितने लोगों को चाहिए भूत आपके बेड के नीचे? So you don't want to encounter horror or horror or disgusting things, but you enjoy watching them on screen, right? So there is a pleasure that you derive from horror, and that is what Natya Shastra explains to you, right? So rasa is different from bhav. Bhav may be bhayanak. I'm sorry, bhay. Bhayanaka is the rasa. When you watch love scenes on the stage, it is rati, but the experience that you get is shrungar. Rasa, Sahrudaya experiences it as shrungar. So shrungar is a rasa. There, when there is laughter, you experience it as hasya. Right? When there is shok, when you see a person sad on the stage, you experience karuna. So karuna is a ras, shok is bhav. When you see a hero fighting against many people, it is utsaha, but that is experienced as veer ras. Salman Khan beating up 30 people and they bounce on the ground, ऐसे सब देखता है, लोग देखने जाते हैं. So that is veer ras, right? Bhaya is experienced as bhayanak. Krodh is experienced as raudra. Disgust is experienced as, or jugupsa is experienced as vibhatsa. या धर्म क्या कहते हो भाई? Love is not ras. Love is bhav. Shrungar is ras. Not loving and love, right? So when you see hero and heroine making love on the screen, you experience Shrungar. You get that? When you see something which causes marvel, it's called Vismay, right? All those sci-fi movies and VFX, Marvel superheroes. And the rasa that you experience is Adbhut. So 8 bhav, sthai bhav, or 8 rasa. That's the formula. That's the equation that is given by Natya Shastra. कुछ कहना है?
हाँ सर, श्रृंगार रस तो फिर erotic वाले zone में चला गया, right? But what about the emotion of love that is there? So
Rati is the emotion that we are talking about, sthai bhav.
okay.
Now, Vatsalya would be something else, right? Tenderness, motherly feeling. Yeah, is a different ras. So that, according to, if I'm not mistaken, no, in the list it doesn't feature. And there are vyobhichari bhavas, and remember, don't apply modern psychological theories of emotion to something that is 2000 years old, right? Please don't do that. It was based on the existing psychology of those times. And vyobhichari bhavas are transient emotions like revulsion, nirveda, glani or anguish, suspicion or shanka, jealousy or asuya, arrogance or mada, shrama or fatigue, alasya or lassitude. But for many people, alasya can be sthai bhav, right? इतने आलसी होते हैं कि पढ़ने की इच्छा ही नहीं होती, फिर एग्जाम का पैनिक आता है तब वो जागते हैं. बट अकॉर्डिंग टू भरत, आलस्य इज अ व्यभिचारी भाव. यानी थोड़ी देर आप बोर हो सकते हो, आलसी हो सकते हो, मगर कल थोड़े टाइम के बाद पढ़ सकते हो. पर आज वो स्थायी भाव हो चुका है, राइट धर्म? Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I actually wanted to extend on that point, and I wanted to say that
Which point?
This alas wala jo point आपने कहा.
I think that has struck a chord with many people. Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to say that it then depends on the environment that we live in, and all
As
this.
I've been saying, please don't apply modern theories, understanding of emotion, of psychology to something that is 2000 years old.
But sir, wouldn't this be true 2000 years back?
I don't know. They have a different categorization of emotions.
Okay.
See, knowledge changes. Knowledge is historical. It's not fixed. So their understanding of emotions were on these lines. 8 sthai bhav or 33 vyobhichari bhav or 8 ras. Now it changes by the time you reach 9th century. We are talking of 2nd century, either before Christ or after Christ. 700 years later, Abhinav Gupta would add one more rasa called Shanta, right? Shanta rasa as the chief rasa of Mahabharata. And later on, Rup Goswami, very important Chaitanya Sampradaya philosopher, would add bhakti as a rasa. Right? So you have 10 rasa according to Rup Goswami. According to Abhinav Gupta in 11th century, you have 9 rasa. And according to Bharat's Natya Shastra, you have 8 rasa. But the idea of rasa is at core of Indian Sanskrit poetics, is a point that you need to understand. So anything that you have to ask, tomorrow we'll find out how that is communicated, right? What is the formula for expressing emotions artistically, or Rasa Sutra as it is called. Any questions, doubts so far?
Sir, can you please tell me the name of who Introduce the ninth rasa.
Rupa Goswami, right? Belonging to
And
Chaitanya
the 10th one?
Sampradaya. That was,
And the 10th one?
pardon?
And who named the 10th one? Bhakti Rasa.
Abhinav Gupta. Abhinav Gupta. Probably one
Okay.
of the greatest philosophers in India, right? Abhinav Gupta was called. Okay. Any other question? किसी को कुछ पूछना है या सब लोग सो गए या
No,
चैट
sir.
कर रहे हैं?
No, no.
अगर खाना खा रहे हो तो मुझे भी भेज दो, मुझे भी भूख लगी है। कितने लोग खा रहे हैं खाना? जो क्लास में खाना खाएगा उसके लिए पनिशमेंट ये है कि जब जब कॉलेज खुलेगा तब खाना लेके टीचर्स को खिलाना पड़ेगा। साउंड्स गुड? गौरव?
Sir, I just finished.
देखो कितना देना नहीं चाहते तो ना बोलो ना, खत्म कर दिया उस वो क्या होता है। Okay, so I have also put Bharat's Natya Shastra extract from that in the group. So read that and we will discuss it tomorrow, right?
Okay, sir.
Please stop here and have a good day. Take all the precautions. Get yourself vaccinated whenever you get a chance. Though I'm not sure of the supply now. Okay, so see you tomorrow.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.